haven't been this nervous in years. Have you ever felt like you were too old to start something new? That's how I feel right now. Hi, I'm Lloyd, and I've decided that that's the only thing you're going to know about me, at least for a while. A great man once said that you should start with a quote because it makes you seem smarter. So, anyway, let's get started. Welcome to whatever this turns out to be. It's 2023. This is another YouTube channel by a guy, a college-educated male, a college-educated straight white male. Groundbreaking. But things aren't always what they appear, except in this case, because I am in fact a college-educated straight white male. That's just how things are. That being said, though, I want to use this channel to interrogate the world from the only perspective I can personally know, my own. However limiting that may be, it is all I have. And that brings me to the first thing that I want to talk about. It's a problem, or let's say a feature of our very much brand identity-driven lives of social media and internet content. It's something I'll call the identity trap. Usually this is a term you hear in business circles from expensive people with expensive suits and expensive haircuts. It's the idea that a company, or in the way I'll be using it, a person, can try to refresh their identity and in so doing call attention to the intentionality of such a change, undermining its effectiveness. You've heard this story before, even if you don't know the name. Coca-Cola thinks it has to compete with Pepsi in the 1980s, rebrands itself as New Coke, and in a half-baked attempt to capture a changing demographic of younger consumers, it backfires. Actually, one of my favorite such stories is that of Pizza Hut, which attempted a rebranding in 2009 as The Hut. You might remember that. Adopting a more skeuomorphic logo design that was strongly reminiscent of the designs of contemporary mobile operating systems, iOS 1. And yet the rebrand was an abject failure, derided by the target audience as the disingenuous coat of paint it was over a product that had barely changed in decades. While consumer tastes had shifted toward fresher ingredients, more complex tastes, and healthier options, failures are often more instructive than successes, and this failure was one of a string of similar issues that have plagued the Yum family of food brands like KFC and Pizza Hut in the United States. The reason it's so instructive may be how easy it is to diagnose the problem. American consumers may be surprised to learn that these very same brands are present in the European market, where the brands do indeed symbolize the new and modern, and which offer an array of tasty and innovative food products that are immensely popular with 18 to 35-year-old demographics. So what's the problem with America? Well, at least part of the problem is that while the American arms of these fast food chains have been rebranding themselves every few years for decades, their menus and food preparation methods have barely changed in 40 years. Because these brands are relative newcomers on the European market, they've had the luxury of space to innovate and experiment with new products in a market that is very forgiving of mistakes, where everything is new. The way the American financial system works, publicly traded companies are disincentivized to take creative risks with their core products. Slapping on a new coat of paint is far less risky. We could follow this rabbit hole to talk about the financialization of American business perhaps another time. In a sense, this crisis of identity extends beyond business. To describe the America of today, a highly financialized, highly image-focused landscape with very little underlying innovation. The failure to take real risks has left Americans and American companies behind, and has let American consumers down. All right. Suffice to say, you get the idea of what an identity trap looks like. What I would like to talk about, and what forms the bulk of today's discussion, is the idea of an identity trap on a personal level. As an American expatriate, quotes, and as a college-educated, straight white male to be specific, the story of this crisis of personal branding is much older than the internet. My first awareness of the concept in a literary sense was the classic straight white male syllabus of an 11th grade literature class. The Great Gatsby, A Farewell to Arms, The Sun Also Rises, titled Fiesta in the UK market, by the way. Each of these books deals with the crisis of identity that faced the new American man in the early 20th century. He was suave and sophisticated, he was lettered, and he was typically a drunk. F. Scott Fitzgerald once wrote that there are no second acts in American lives, but the books of this period are the story of a generation of men seeking a second act. The experience of the First World War was the dehumanization of conflict and the destruction of the illusions of European civilized culture. Led a generation of young men to seek a second identity, to transgress from who they were born to be, to try to be who they wanted to be. And yet these people, Gatsby, Frederick Henry, or Jake Barnes, inevitably come up against the reality of an identity that cannot be changed, of a history that doesn't go away just because you don't acknowledge it. And in truth, at least where it concerns the college-educated straight white male over the last 100 or so years, not a lot has really changed. So why is this identity a trap? It's not quite the same problem as a stale pizza, with the brand bringing an expensive marketing team in a ham-fisted attempt to appeal to young consumers who don't really like their products or their values anymore. And yet, in a way, it is the same thing. Today, the college-educated straight white male is perpetually entrapped by his own empowered position in society. Let me try to explain by letting someone else do it. Macon Holt, another college-educated straight white male, in a 2016 essay, The Joke and Its Relation to College-Educated Straight White Males, argues that this self-objectification of the members of a powerful group that doesn't consider itself to be a group can serve to reinforce the powerful status of that group while offering other members a vicarious thrill of the experience of power. That might sound complicated, but it's sort of not. Anyone familiar with genres of cringe comedy like boomer humor or attack helicopter jokes? If you can identify as another gender, then I can identify as an attack helicopter. Ha ha ha. Everyone who's familiar with those knows that they're not jokes. In this immensely popular subgenre of generational and racial grievances, it's not really a joke at all. It's more of a taunt. It says, I'm powerful. I have no need of recognition for my own powerful identity. Look upon my works, ye mighty in despair. Holt concludes, the thing about the straight, white, college-educated male in a Western context is that they are the most powerful of any group. However, it is a power that comes at an enormous cost of alienating paranoia. Being relatively powerful can create a delusional perspective wherein one can believe that their agency has far greater reach than it actually does. It has greater reach than the agency of others, but less than one might think. So then any infraction against this is very deeply felt, and as an unfamiliar sensation, it is also frightening. Glimpses of this understanding are now blessedly common in popular media, where even if the middle-class white anti-heroes may still be the focus of many or even most stories, the alienation and paranoia of this powerful position is now a common enough theme. Don Draper Tony Soprano, Jordan Belfort, Jeffrey Dahmer, Gordon Gekko, Jordan B. Peterson, and Walter White. These are not good men. They should not even be considered redeemable men, and yet they are popular with college-educated white male audiences because their condition bespeaks an unspoken truth of power, that it corrupts. And the popular movie-going and television-watching audience in America and Europe specifically still markets these characters to its largest and most profitable target audience, the college-educated straight white male. The deniability of this unspoken sympathy for the monster is helped by subtle cues that cast these men as of lower status than the viewer. Tony Soprano is a criminal. Don Draper is uneducated and lives under a stolen identity. Jeffrey Dahmer is a loser. Jordan B. Peterson is an emotional wreck. And Walter White is a henpecked suburban dad who drives a Pontiac Aztek, perhaps the automotive personification of class paranoia. And yet, decades of popularity of what Brett Martin called difficult men in his creatively titled book, Difficult Men, Behind the Scenes of a Creative Revolution, has given some college-educated straight white males an altogether different impression of the joke, of their own power. Today, Wall Street brokers unironically enjoy The Wolf of Wall Street, and Redditors gleefully meme the transgressive shock humor of subreddits like Thanos Did Nothing Wrong, which, for all it apparently unironically embraces the ideas of technocratic fascism, I've personally observed to ride a barely visible line between unironic celebrations of the exercise of unilateral power and the ironic, unironic embrace of that power. Either way, class, racial, and gender paranoia is the critical ingredient to these ironically unironic subgenres of pop culture. Whatever one has to say about such men, they're certainly not simple. And this has given a generation of commentators upon the culture of white male paranoia, in some cases, cover to revel within their own spleen. After all, there is nothing more uncomfortable for the college-educated straight white male than to stop talking. To loop back to the failed rebrandings that have become so common in America, the reason for their failures may be explained by the popularity of the difficult man as a symbol of class and racial paranoia in the 21st century. These brands that adopt superficial changes to their public images seek disingenuously to appeal to a younger audience of largely non-white consumers by associating themselves with the semiotics of the modern and the inclusive, but without adopting a deep inward change. The difficult man of the golden age of American television is characterized by his rebellion against the modern, and his redemption, such as it may be, is found in the alignment of the image with the self. For Walter White or Tony Soprano, the metamorphosis achieved is not a deep change. It is the destruction of false faces. Recently, in the hit miniseries Dahmer, the Jeffrey Dahmer story, this metamorphosis is subverted by Dahmer's evolution from a person with no external image whatsoever into someone who seeks to redeem himself through the adoption of the false face of evangelical Christianity. The show is at pains to demonstrate that Dahmer's downfall occurs not because of his horrible deeds, but as a consequence of his attempts to redeem himself in the eyes of the public. The false face he eventually adopts so incenses those who identify with his victims, particularly young black men, that he is killed as retribution for his crimes, even despite the aversion to the sexual identity of his victims. The rage that drives Dahmer's killing on the show, I think, is the rage against the false face he has adopted. The show highlights his motivation with a lingering close-up of Dahmer's impassive expression as he professes to have been changed. We may recognize subtly a correlation between the anger of Dahmer's killer and the derision for consumer brands that attempt to adopt false faces. The truth of the dissonance between one's public face and their true inner life is enervating. I don't believe, as others have suggested, that the show is attempting to rehabilitate Dahmer or to contextualize his death as an act of redemption. His face in his final moments is impassive. Though images flash on screen of his horrible crimes, they are married visually with the brutality of his killer strikes to his head and face, connecting the strikes with the rage of the killer, and contrasting this with the emotionless, autonomical acts of Dahmer himself. We may draw from this argument that in the modern world, the greatest sin isn't cruelty or wrath or even corruption, but falsehood. The oppressor's attempt to adopt the false face of normality, hiding the inner rot which drives them. We are not disturbed by the values of large corporations as much as we are by the dissonance of those values with the image they seek to project. Thus, Kylie Jenner handing a Pepsi to a protester is an attack on the meaning of protest, as real and meaningful as the placement of a flower in the gun barrel of a riot cop. So this leaves us at something of a crossroads. Anand Giridharadas wrote in his brilliant book, Winners Take All, the elite charade of changing the world, that a path to true reform and dissolution of white male paranoia requires one thing that the born elite of American and European society simply cannot accept: to lose some of their power. The crisis of modern Western society, tied into the underlying crisis of capitalism in the 21st century, is that even when we know that what we're doing is destructive, ultimately even to ourselves, we are incentivized to perpetuate it, in the knowledge that if we do not, someone else will. Making a stale type of pizza for 40 years may be killing my business, but I'm incentivized to let that continue. So I find myself here a perfect illustration of this conundrum. I still want to create. I still want to criticize. I still like popular culture. I can't help it. Like the scorpion says the fox in the Indian fable, it's my nature. It's not simple, but nothing is. That's why this channel exists. I'm what psychoanalysts would call neurotic, to anyone who would pay them to say that. And what that most generally means is that I worry. I worry all the time about things I have no control over whatsoever. Perhaps this channel is an attempt to assert some control over my thoughts, over a cultural dialogue, over my own life, to complicate the world around me in the hopes that others will complicate their own worlds. Is this a naive hope doomed to backfire? Yes, most likely. But I can't help it. It's my nature. While I do this ultimately to comfort myself, to quiet the worries in my own mind, I also understand that doing anything that attempts to complicate the worldview of other people is, in a way, a selfish act. But it's a selfish act I cannot avoid. And recently I've found something like an outlet for that worry. I've actually been writing scripts for popular YouTube channels. Maybe you've seen them. They're generally 30% too long and often sacrifice clarity for precision. It was for this reason and possibly others that it was suggested to me that I take a break and try something new, something of my own, something fresh, something I probably should have done 10 years ago, but didn't, because I didn't think you could just do that. And it turns out you can, and I just did. So while I get used to being on camera and you get used to looking at me on camera, I'll be taking some overly deep dives into some well-trodden pools. The metaphor sort of breaks down. I admit that. I'm courageous. I'll be doing this for no particular reason, in no particular order, and with no particular goal in mind. At least not yet. One of the motivations is to express myself, but another is the challenge of mastering a new format. which is something I find myself compelled to do from time to time, usually about every 5 years or so. For example, most of the music you're going to hear on these videos is my own particular interest of mine, but I'll be experimenting with a number of formats. There will be me talking to the camera like I'm doing now, or attempting to talk into the camera while I read, talking about whatever's keeping me up that particular month. And there'll be videos with literary and film analysis, discussions on politics, music, political economy, social media, and technology. All right, none of this is exactly groundbreaking stuff, but my aim is going to be to bring you an earnest discussion of important topics, not to shout at you, but to talk to you, where I'll try to give you a sense of the issues and then argue my own case, such as it may be. I've often been told that I'm a natural teacher, and I think this is true. I find my way into new topics and ideas by explaining them to people, which is maybe more beneficial to me than it is to the people that I'm explaining them to, but that's what we'll do. If any of that sounds appealing, you can really help me out by going ahead and subscribing for updates, see what happens. I hope to post about once a week, maybe a bit more, we'll see. The sources for each video will be shared in the video description in case you'd like to learn more about whatever I'm referencing. So thank you, and I look forward to seeing you again on Nothing is Simple. Against the reality. Levy, please don't yell. Please don't yell. Thank you.
Girl, I like to be liked but alone. To be low, to be low. She says she likes me very much, and that's fine. But will she last or slow down time? To be like